Good morning, students. I hope everybody out there is well. I'm sorry I'm not there today. I do have a cough, and I'll probably have to mute my microphone a couple times so you don't hear me coughing. Um, Other than that, I feel okay. I just have this cough and I can't really control it. So I hope it's not the big disease. It might just be a summer cold. That's what I'm praying for. All right, so let's go through our next subject here. Remember last time I started talking about the heart, and now we're going to continue a little bit on that and move toward the circulatory system and the blood. Okay, so our circulatory system, you can see the heart in the middle here. I wish you could see my mouse, but I don't think you can. The heart in the middle. Remember, the left side of the heart, which is on your right side, pumps blood all the way to the body, down to your toes. And the right side, which is on your left, only pumps it right here to the lungs. And we've seen the lungs, and we know how they're kind of that spongy material and everything. So we know it gets oxygen to the blood. And then that oxygen is pumped to the rest of the body so that all of the tissues can get oxygen and the nutrients from our digestive tract as well. So it's called the circulatory system because it's a giant circle, and we talked last time about how really it's kind of a giant figure eight. You know, it goes to the body, to the heart, to the lungs, to the heart, to the body. So it makes kind of a big figure eight kind of a deal. So our heart right here is, we looked at it last time. It's our main organ of the circulatory system. It's a pump. It's a muscle. It has chambers in it. Do y'all remember how many chambers it has? Remember, a human heart has 4 chambers. We opened that heart last time and we could see those chambers in there. It says it's a hollow organ, but it's hollow in the sense that it has those 4 chambers. The upper chambers are called atria, the left atrium and the right atrium, and the lower chambers are called ventricles, the left ventricle and the right ventricle. So if you look at your picture over here, you can see that the left ventricle is on the right side, because if I were standing there and that heart was in my body, that would be my left side over there. But from your perspective, it looks like it's on the right. That's the one that's pumping all the way to the body. And then on the left side of the heart, the right side of the heart, which is on your left side, it's pumping only to the lungs, okay? So we talked last time about how the heart itself needs to have a really good blood supply. And if the blood supply is cut off to the heart muscle itself, that's what we call a heart attack. Okay, so it's good to keep our vessels on our heart nice and healthy, and you do that by eating a healthy diet and getting plenty of exercise and that kind of thing. Not too much junk food, right? Okay. Now, I want to talk about this main vessel leaving the left ventricle. Okay, so it starts in the blood starts in the right atrium. It gets pumped down to the right ventricle. It gets pumped over to the lungs. Then from the lungs, it comes to the left atrium, and then pumped down to the left ventricle, and then pumped out to the body through this amazing artery here called the aorta. It's the biggest artery in our body. So you can see here, can you see that the little outline of the heart is right here by the aorta? I'm pointing at it, but I don't think you can see my pointer. It's like a dotted line of the heart right here, okay? And you can see how this big curve is in the aorta. So it's called the aortic arch. It comes around. There are these main vessels going up to your brain, okay? So the aorta is sending that oxygenated blood up to your brain. It's kind of going there first, really. We have our subclavian arteries and our carotid arteries. Those are the main ones getting to our brain. And then the big curve brings it all the way down to the rest of the body. Okay, so therefore we can get all of our body parts oxygenated right there. So that's a big, giant vessel. In fact, that one is so big and it's so close to the heart that it actually has a pulse. So when you reach your hand up to your neck like we did last time and feel your pulse, you're feeling those arteries that come right off of the aorta. So that left subclavian or that right subclavian, if you kind of squeeze a little tighter, it's the carotid. You're feeling that pulse in there. Also, if you reach down to your wrist to try to get your pulse there, you notice how you have to push kind of deeply, and that's because the arteries are deeper than our veins. You can actually see our veins kind of at the top of our skin right there. They're kind of blue, right? But the arteries are deeper and they have a little pulse to them, and that's how we get a pulse on a patient. Okay, so let's talk about blood. So we're pumping the blood with the heart throughout the body to get the tissues their nutrients and their oxygen. So it turns out that blood has a liquid portion and a solid portion. The liquid part of the blood has proteins and sugars and nutrients. We call it plasma. Sometimes it's called serum, but you can see in the tube over there, the test tube, if I take a tube of blood, I doubt any of you have ever had to donate your blood at all or to have a blood test for something. But as you get older, you may have to have some blood tests for something if you're sick or something like this, if a doctor's trying to find out something. And what they'll do is they will stick a needle in your arm and they will put several tubes into that needle and get several little test tubes of blood. One of the tubes has a red top on it, and that red top tube is called a clot tube, C-L-O-T, clot. What happens is the blood goes into that tube and it clots. It's normal for blood to clot when it's outside of the body. When it's inside the body, we do not want it to clot unless you have a cut or something like that. If you have a clot that shows up in a place when you're not supposed to have it, you could end up with a heart attack. So that clot could end up on a vessel on your heart, and it could, cut off the blood supply. Or it could enter your brain, and that would cause what's known as a stroke. All right, so we don't want it to clot, but when we're taking a clot tube, we're doing that on purpose. I take that tube and I put it in a really fancy machine called a centrifuge, and I spin it down, and I end up with what you see on the left there, a test tube that has the solid portions on the bottom, the red part, those are called the red blood cells, a little tiny sliver across the top that's literally white, it's like a little white line, those are the white blood cells, and the little platelets, we'll get to each one of those in a minute. And then that plasma at the top, that's the liquid portion. Now the reason I want that is because I can test that liquid portion, the plasma, for other things. Do you have the right kind of proteins? Are your protein levels low? Are they high? I might be looking for a hormone. If the hormone is high, it might show up in the plasma. And I just get those solid portions out of the way so I can test the plasma. All right, so then the solid portions, down at the bottom we have the red blood cells. Notice I have it's stated RBC. So RBC stands for red blood cell, and we're going to see how they're shaped in a minute. Their job is to carry oxygen to the tissues. And then our white blood cells are to help fight disease and infection. All right, so I'm not sure if that A, C, D, and B must be answers to something in your book, is what I must be, or maybe the old book. Okay, and then we have these little things called platelets, which are fragments of cells that help to form the blood clots when we want them. Okay, so like for instance, if you've cut yourself, we want the blood to clot then. We don't want you, because if it doesn't clot, you'll just keep bleeding out and it'll cause a big problem. All right, so let's take a look at, let's see, let's watch a little video to give us an idea of what's going on here.
What is blood? Blood is actually a mixture of cells suspended in a slightly yellowish liquid called plasma. Plasma is made up mostly of water, but it also contains proteins, sugars, hormones, and salts. The three different types of cells you'll find in plasma are red blood cells, or erythrocytes, white blood cells, or leukocytes, and platelets, or thrombocytes. Red blood cells give the blood its color and make up 40 to 45% of your blood. They're round and look a little like a donut without the hole in the middle. Their main job is to carry oxygen to the other cells of the body and to take away the carbon dioxide as a waste product. Red blood cells only live 4 months, but healthy bone marrow produces 4 to 5 billion red cells every hour to keep replenishing the ones that wear out. White blood cells, on the other hand, are the body's defense system. They all fight infection from bacteria, viruses, all those nasty microbes that can cause disease. Whenever germs begin to infect your body, they send out a signal that the granulocyte recognizes. Just as soon as the granulocyte detects the signal, it begins its journey to the site of the infection. When at last they find the invader germ, they quickly move in for the kill, first attacking the invader and then eating it. Something else that is truly amazing is how the platelets work. Platelets are small pieces of cell material, or cytoplasm, whose job it is to plug holes in the vessel walls. So, say you're standing inside the blood vessel and looking at the tear in its wall. You'd see millions of platelets responding to the injury, throwing themselves over the cut. They stick to the wound's edges and to each other to form a plug that slows the loss of blood within 3 to 5 minutes. A platelet plug will last for only 24 to 72 hours because the platelets run out of energy and begin to fall apart. But as long as there is still an unhealed hole in the blood vessel wall, the clot will continue being formed, dissolved, and reformed to stop and prevent more bleeding from occurring. When the wound is completely healed by the new cells growing over it, the clot will be cleared away and blood will begin to flow through the vessel normally.
All right. So there we go. So here they are. Here's a summary of all the different kind of blood cells that we have. So you'll see to the right bottom there, those are the erythrocytes. We call those red blood cells. They are fairly small. And what's interesting, you know how he said it looks like kind of like a donut without the hole? I kind of think of it like, if you're going down the river on one of those rafts that's round and it has the seat in it that you can sit in. It kind of reminds me of that. And the reason why they're so thin in the middle is because they do not have a nucleus. Most cells have a nucleus because in the nucleus is where the DNA would be. But erythrocytes, red blood cells, don't have any nucleus, so they don't have any DNA. So they can't reproduce, make new cells from old cells. That is why the bone marrow is constantly making new red blood cells. Yes, so in the marrow of the bone, we have two types of marrow. Yellow marrow, which stores fat. It's kind of real greasy. You may have seen that if you've been using bones to make your soup, that little part in the middle there. But then in the red marrow, which is in the spongy part of bone, that's where all your blood is being made. So all of these cells that we see right here are being manufactured in your bones. All right, so your bones are very important for that factor. And furthermore, the erythrocytes, the red blood cells, have to be made all the time because they just live about 4 months. They deliver that oxygen, and then they go to the liver to die. And then we have new cells replacing them all the time. All right, meanwhile, the white blood cells, so look, and then let's look at the platelets and get them out of the way. Notice how they're little tiny little fragments of cell. They become very sticky whenever exposed to any kind of breach, whether it's to air or just a cut in the vessel wall. So if there's a cut in the vein, in the wall of a vein, then the platelets will automatically start to get sticky and stick to that, just like the video showed us right there. Okay, now the white cells are really the most interesting here. Notice we have 5 different kinds. The one at the top left is called a neutrophil, or a segmented neutrophil. Notice it's got a nucleus, and the nucleus is in segments. That's why it's called segmented neutrophil. It's the most common white blood cell in your body. In my Biology 2 class, we actually make a smear of students' blood cells, and we take a look at them under the microscope, and we see a lot of those neutrophils. Just below the neutrophils, you'll see the second most common white cell in the body. It's called lymphocyte. Notice they're kind of small. They're only slightly larger than a red blood cell. The other white cells are larger than red blood cells, but the lymphocytes are a little smaller. Now, they're special, so they get made in the bone, like all of our blood cells, but then they have a special spot in the body that if you get sick, then they will proliferate. So that means they will go into, instead of being made in the bone, they will start to go through cell division on their own. And that special place is called a lymph node. You've probably heard of a lymph node. If you've ever had like a swelling in your neck and you say, oh, my glands are swollen, those are actually your lymph nodes. And that is your immune system taking care of a disease. Okay, so those lymphocytes, when they proliferate, when they grow and grow more and more in your lymph nodes, it's to fight disease. So if we have a sickness, like I have this little cough going right now, so my immune system is kicking in, and it's starting to make all these new white cells, and my lymphocytes are proliferating. And they even have some special types of lymphocytes. There's a whole bunch of them. There's one called the natural killer lymphocyte, and it kills cancer cells. There's one called the B cell and the T cell, and those are the ones that send out something called antibodies. So you may have heard a little bit about antibodies. With this COVID infection that's going around, it's a virus, so it's not, if there's two different ways we typically get sick with a pathogenic thing, and one of them's a virus, which comes in and attacks our body. That's what this COVID business is. The other's a bacterial infection, and those are a little easier to treat because we have medication for that called antibiotics. But antibiotics do not work against viruses. That's why when you get a cold or the flu or something, you just have to rest until you get better, till you feel better, because guess what? Your body's making those lymphocytes. And furthermore, it's the way that vaccinations work. Vaccinations work by influencing your body to make lymphocytes that make antibodies against whatever you put into your body as a vaccine. And then that will, the next time you come into contact with it, then the antibodies will be ready to go to kill the virus when it comes in. So the antibodies can bind up with the virus and kill it. So that's pretty cool. All right, the other white cells, the one in the top middle is called the eosinophil. I always love it if a student ends up with that kind of cell because they're really cool looking under the microscope. Because see all those red dots in there? Those are called granules. In fact, the top 3 types of cells are called granulocytes. And in that video, he kept referring to it as a granulocyte. They all have those granules in there, but honestly, the eosinophil is the only one that you actually see it on the slide. The other ones, they're in there, but you can't see it as well. They're not very common. Typically, they'll show up if the patient has a parasitic infection. For instance, when I worked with dogs, they would have possibly heartworms or intestinal worms. And when they had that, they produced these eosinophils that would help fight off parasites. So they're specially made to fight off parasites. It's normal to have a few just coursing around in your blood system in case a parasite should show up. In a human, a parasitic infection would include something like malaria and things like that. And interestingly, I believe some of the treatments that they're using for the COVID virus are anti-parasitic medications. One of them called ivermectin, for instance. The basophil over here to the right, it has a larger nucleus, and in fact, when I worked at the vet clinic, I had to make slides of blood and count each one of the different types of white cells in there. And I counted up to 100, so then I would have easy math, right? If I had 10 eosinophils, I would have 10% eosinophil, right? Something like that. But the basophil always looked like a letter B inside the nucleus. You can't really, I don't know if you can tell here, but I always thought it looked like a letter B. All right, then the last one down here at the bottom called a monocyte is the big one. We call it the big eater. It is, its job is to engulf, like the video showed, engulfing bacteria and other foreign things that come into our body and eating them up. That's called phagocytosis, and it just gobbles them up. Now, sometimes there is one virus that does cause a unusual growth of monocytes to take place, and that condition is called mononucleosis. I don't know if you've heard of it. Sometimes it's known as the kissing disease because it spreads from person to person. But I have met children who have had mononucleosis before, and they weren't kissing anyone, so it doesn't have to be spread that way. Anyway, when we see those monocytes right there, it gives us an idea of that particular viral infection, and then the doctor can go treat it accordingly by using medicine sometimes we use to make us feel more comfortable, and then we just have to rest and get over our viral infection, okay? But our white cells are working like crazy in there. Now, sometimes what the white cells will do, they'll come attack a place, and if there's a bunch of them, you may have had, for instance, a cut that got infected. And sometimes you would see something called pus. Well, you know what pus is? It's just all those white blood cells who have done all their work of gobbling up whatever they were gobbling up, and then they died. And they were left there. So that's why the pus is kind of white, because it's white blood cells. Also, sometimes it appears a little bit yellow because it might have gobbled up some nasty old bacteria right there. So that's what pus is. Gross, right? But that's good. That means our body is responding. So think of our immune system, our white blood cells, as our army in our body that's going to go fight the battles. All right, so it's fighting battles. And it's really an elegant and amazing design that we are able to really overcome most of the diseases that come our way. In fact, this COVID, it turns out that if we just let our immune system do the work, then we will, I think we have something like a 99% chance of overcoming it. And one of the ways to support your immune system is to support it with certain kinds of vitamins. For instance, in this particular case, vitamin D helps to make your immune system stronger. I've been taking vitamin D all year. And vitamin C is always very helpful for making our white cells strong to perform well. And then what's the other one? We have zinc. It turns out that zinc will actually go inside your cell and stop the replication of viruses. So that's pretty cool stuff. So typically we should be getting those things, from a really, really good diet, and maybe some plants that are grown in very healthy soil. But sometimes our soil is not as healthy as it used to be because we do a lot of planting in there. And so sometimes we have to supplement with certain vitamins. So I'm not sure if any of you take a multivitamin, but I bet you they have. If you look at it, you'll see it probably has zinc in there and possibly some vitamin D. Okay, so there's our white cells. Now here's our red blood cells. Look at that beautiful picture. I've always liked a picture of the red blood cells. Those are actual cells. The picture here has been taken with a special kind of a microscope called an electron scanning micrograph is what that picture is. So instead of using light to look at something under a microscope, the electron scanning microscope uses electrons to kind of like a laser beam across them, and it gives us this impression of what they look like. And then the computer goes and adds in the color. So that red color in there has been added by a computer. But you can definitely see that really cool donut shape to them right there. And remember, I told you that's because there's no nucleus in there. So the only thing they're concerned about is carrying oxygen. Now they carry that oxygen inside that cell with a special protein that's all folded up to fit in there. And that special protein is called hemoglobin. And the hemoglobin can hold on to 4 different oxygen molecules. And so each cell can take 4 different oxygen molecules to the tissues. Then the tissues release, like the video said, some toxins, which would be carbon dioxide, and we breathe it out. It takes it to our lungs, we breathe it out. All right, so we breathe in the oxygen. The red cells take that to our cells in our body. We exhale the CO2 that came from the cells and through the red blood cell. Pretty cool little system there. All right, so there's our red blood cell on the left. It says it contains several 100,000 hemoglobin molecules, because you imagine how small those are, and each one of those holds on to 4 oxygens. So when I said the red cell holds 4 oxygens, I meant per hemoglobin. Okay, so per hemoglobin we can see that thing called a heme over there, you can see right there, is the part of the protein. So the molecules all folded up. There are actually 4 pieces there that are folded into that funny looking tangle. And that heme right there is a special section of the protein that has something called iron. You've heard of iron. And furthermore, if you look at your vitamin you're taking, it might have iron in it. And iron is what makes us have strong red blood cells, because that's what holds on to the oxygen. Okay, so the heme is holding on to the oxygen and taking it to our system. Very cool. And they must be really, really tiny that they can hold. It says they're 100,000. Wow, that's a lot. So you can see each red blood cell is carrying a lot of oxygen. Now, I will tell you this. When the oxygen is on the hemoglobin, it causes the red cell to appear bright red. So that's why red blood cells are red, because the oxygen causes the hemoglobin to turn red. And so then once we use it, then the hemoglobin drops off most of the oxygen, and the blood turns a little bit kind of a darker purple color. In the picture when we show the heart, with the red blood and then the blue blood, I think I told you this last time, it's not really blue, but it is a deeper purple kind of a color because it has less oxygen. I don't think that it ever gets rid of every oxygen molecule in there, because our system for delivering it to our body is so efficient that we have all that oxygen kind of left on there. In fact, when you breathe out, when you exhale, you're also exhaling a little bit of oxygen because it was left over. All right, if we're looking at a blood smear, this is what I would be looking at under a microscope. Okay, so you can see right away, look at these, the little tiny ones with the hole. Guess what those are? Those are red blood cells. I would be pointing at a point with my pointer at this point. And those 2 big ones in the middle are white blood cells. Okay, so I believe those are both segmented neutrophils. like I said, the most common one. Notice how they're quite a bit larger than the red blood cell. And you can also on those kind of see those granules in there. Now, do you see over to the right side that kind of purpley dot, just a little tiny dot? That's a platelet right there. So when I would look at a slide of blood, a blood smear, I would go in there and I would count those white blood cells. I would take notice of the platelets. I didn't count them, but I would notice, first of all, are they there? So that's good news. If they don't have platelets, they don't clot their blood very well. And are there lots? And if they do have lots, there may be something that causes them to clot their blood too much. So that's the kind of information I would get from what we call a differential slide. This is called a diff slide. Here's a close-up picture using an electron scanning microscope to show a lymphocyte next to some red blood cells. Remember, the computer has added the color here. So that white one that looks like a little, I don't know, coconut puffball thing is a lymphocyte. It's pretty small. Notice it's just a little bit larger than the red blood cell. And remember, the lymphocyte is the special one. It's the one that's going to make those fancy disease-fighting things like the antibodies. Okay, so what about giving blood? Now, this tells me we're on page 196. I don't know if that's the accurate page number. I apologize. I meant to look that up. But giving blood, sometimes people lose blood, like if they've been in an accident and they've had a big cut or something, and so they need blood from other people. And so you can donate your blood. So we can transfer blood from a healthy person to an injured person, and that's called a blood transfusion. All right, I will tell you this, you cannot give blood under normal conditions until you're, I believe, it might even be 21 now. It's at least 18, maybe 21. I remember when I turned 18, I went to give blood for the first time. I was at school at UT. And furthermore, you have to be over 110 pounds. At least that's what it was then. And I didn't make that cutoff, so I couldn't give blood that time. There are 4 main types of blood. They're called blood types. You've probably heard of blood type. You might know your blood type. I know my blood type. It's O positive, which is a little bit boring, to be honest with you. My high school biology class, Biology 2, we actually tested their blood this year to see what type they had. And I had several who were type A. And it's kind of nice because you can see it do a special kind of clotting on a slide. So it's kind of cool looking is all there is to it. Some types of blood cannot successfully be mixed with certain other types. Remember I told you how we make, our white cells will make antibodies? Well, like for instance, I have the blood type O, and I also have made antibodies. My body has made antibodies against type A and type B. So if somebody put type A or type B blood into me, then it would not help me at all. In fact, it would probably kill me. So it's important that we don't give somebody the wrong blood type. So if somebody's going to have a blood transfusion, it is very important that we know what type of blood they have. So people who donate their blood are called donors. And that girl over to the right, you can see she's holding a ball, and she would squeeze the ball, and that would help kind of get the blood pressure going up in her arm right there. And then she's got that tube going there. You can't really see where it's going. It's collecting in a little bag down beneath her because it's helping, gravity helps to get it into the bag. And then they can take that bag, put it in a refrigerator, and give it to somebody who might need it. So here are the types. So let's start with blood type O on the bottom there. You see how it's got the red blood cell. It's type O. I don't have any antigens on the surface of it. Okay, but I have both antibodies against blood type A, blood type B, and blood type AB. So let's take a look at A. A has A antigens on their surface. We call it a surface antigen, and it makes an antibody against B. Okay, so therefore if you put type B blood into a type A person, type A person's blood would kill off by sending those antibodies out, all of those B blood cells you just put in there. Yikes. Look at our B type blood type B. It has antigen B, noting that it's B, and it produces antibodies against A. All right, and then AB is pretty interesting. It has the marker on the surface for A and B. All right, so see both the little green pyramid and the little blue sphere are on the surface of blood type AB, and they don't produce any antibodies. All right, so you can give AB any blood and they won't produce antibodies against it. So they're called the universal recipient. Now, since blood type O doesn't have any markers on the surface, when I put it into somebody who's type A, there's nothing on the surface to indicate that it needs to have a response of antibodies. So therefore, blood type O is considered the universal donor. I will tell you this, if you know that you have type A blood and you need a transfusion, the best thing for them to give you is type A blood. But in a pinch, they can give you type O. All right, so O can be given, but keep in mind someone like me who has O, which by the way is the most common, I can only get O blood put in my body if I need a transfusion. All right, let's watch a little video. It's a really fun video about how we discovered there were different types of blood.
It's often said that despite humanity's many conflicts, we all bleed the same blood. It's a nice thought, but not quite accurate. In fact, our blood comes in a few different varieties. Our red blood cells contain a protein called hemoglobin that binds to oxygen, allowing the cells to transport it throughout the body. But they also have another kind of complex protein on the outside of the cell membrane. These proteins, known as antigens, communicate with white blood cells, immune cells that protect against infection. Antigens serve as identifying markers, allowing the immune system to recognize your body's own cells without attacking them as foreign bodies. The two main kinds of antigens, A and B, determine your blood type. But how do we get 4 blood types from only 2 antigens? Well, the antigens are coded for by 3 different alleles, varieties of a particular gene. While the A and B alleles code for A and B antigens, the O allele codes for neither. And because we inherit 1 copy of each gene from each parent, every individual has 2 alleles determining blood type. When these happen to be different, one overrides the other, depending on their relative dominance. For blood types, the A and B alleles are both dominant, while O is recessive. So A and A gives you type A blood, while B and B gives you type B. If you inherit one of each, the resulting codominance will produce both A and B antigens, which is type AB. The O allele is recessive, so either of the others will override it when they're paired, resulting in either type A or type B. But if you happen to inherit 2 O's, instructions will be expressed that make blood cells without the A or the B antigen. Because of these interactions, knowing both parents' blood types lets us predict the relative probability of their children's blood types. Why do blood types matter? For blood transfusions, finding the correct one is a matter of life and death. If someone with type A blood is given type B blood, or vice versa, their antibodies will reject the foreign antigens and attack them, potentially causing the transfused blood to clot. But because people with type AB blood produce both A and B antigens, they don't make antibodies against them, so they will recognize either as safe, making them universal recipients. On the other hand, people with blood type O do not produce either antigen, which makes them universal donors, but will cause their immune system to make antibodies that reject any other blood type. Unfortunately, matching donors and recipients is a bit more complicated due to additional antigen systems, particularly the Rh factor, named after the rhesus monkeys in which it was first isolated. Rh plus or Rh minus refers to the presence or absence of the D antigen of the Rh blood group system. And in addition to impeding some blood transfusions, it can cause severe complications in pregnancy. If an Rh negative mother is carrying an Rh positive child, her body will produce Rh antibodies that may cross the placenta and attack the fetus, a condition known as hemolytic disease of the newborn. Some cultures believe blood type to be associated with personality, though this is not supported by science. And though the proportions of different blood types vary between human populations, scientists aren't sure why they evolved, perhaps as protection against blood-borne diseases, or due to random genetic drift. Finally, different species have different sets of antigens. In fact, the 4 main blood types share by us a tree in comparison to the 13 types found in dogs.
Wow. Okay. So dogs have a lot. Yeah, that's interesting. And so when I worked at the vet clinic, we didn't do many blood transfusions for dogs. But I'm guessing they can, and probably do. Also, I told you that my high school class did their blood typing. We also had the Rh factor that we tested for. I, for instance, know that my blood type is O positive. So I do have the Rh factor on my blood cell. But 2 of the girls in my class found out that they were Rh negative. So that is important to know. So later on in their life, if they have babies, then they have to make sure their doctor realizes that they have Rh negative blood. Because a mother with Rh negative blood can still have babies. She just has to do something to counteract those antibodies against the baby during the pregnancy. So as long as they know about it, they can fix that. All right, so here are the types of blood. We have A positive and A negative. We have B positive and B negative. We have AB positive and AB negative, and O positive and O negative. So you may have noticed in the video it showed us that the AB type is the rarest form. Furthermore, it's actually when we talk about genes, genetics, we can say that the O blood type is what is known as recessive. So if you have one parent who has A or B or AB, and the other parent is O, then you will have A, B, or AB and not O, okay? Because O is recessive. So in order to exhibit type O, you have to have 2 genes in your body for type O. And it turns out the majority of people have that. It's still only about 40% of the people because there's so many different types, right? And then A and B are what we call codominant. So when the 2 of those get put together, instead of A being dominant over B or B being dominant over A, you end up with something called AB, an incomplete dominant deal. It's pretty cool. All right, so today for our lab, what we would have been doing, and I'm going to bring it for next week because it's kind of fun, is I would have 4 large cups, each representing one of the blood types. So we'll have an A, a B, a B, and an O. I don't think we deal with the positives and negatives here. And then we will start adding them to other cups and see what happens to these. We'll think of those as patients, right? And if we put the wrong blood into a patient, then that's trouble. Yeah. So it's kind of a fun lab, and I will bring it next time. It's just cups with food coloring in them. And I think O has no coloring. Yeah. All right. So it turns out that in 2 weeks, we do have our models due. All right. So I thought I wrote that date down. Let's see. So 2 weeks from today is the 12th? Yeah, so that would be May 12th. You're going to have your human body model due, okay? So this is a picture of someone's model of it looks like it's the digestive system, okay? So notice they used a balloon for the stomach. For the liver, I don't know if that's a piece of clay, maybe a piece of clay or a straw for the esophagus. And then we have the, whatever that green stuff is for the small intestine. And I guess the cotton balls are the large intestine. So that's kind of cool right there. And it's flat on a board. So that's a perfectly good model right there you can make with some very little investment in materials. You will have to, of course, give a little speech, a little report on, why you were interested in that system and that kind of thing. Once again, I'd like to try to get different systems, so let me know if something in particular is something you like. Here is some our models of the lungs. All right, so remember I had that big one that kind of worked in our room, and it had you pulled the rubber part down on the bottom, and the balloons inflated. So you can see right here, just using a cup to do that with the balloons and a straw right there. So that's a nice deal. Remember, you can always go online and look up how do I make a lung model or something like that. I've also made this model myself with other students using a bottle, like a water bottle, one of the ones that are a little thicker so they don't collapse when you put the balloon on there. And so then you can demonstrate by pulling that bottom balloon down, it causes the inner balloons to inflate because you increase the volume, and therefore the pressure is decreased, so the pressure comes in the straws from above. We talked about that. This is someone who used a cake. They made an eyeball model out of a cake. So that's kind of fun, right? So they labeled the parts right there, and then afterwards I'm sure they shared it with the class and they ate it. Haha. So if you want to make a model that has food involved, that would be fantastic. We'd all love to try that. I do know we have some gluten-free people in the room, so you might want to think about that. They, of course, don't have to eat any of it. All right, so let's sum up what our blood is for. What are the 3 jobs of blood? 1, to transport substances, oxygen, nutrients. Okay, a lot of those nutrients, by the way, are being transported in the plasma, all right? Whereas the oxygen we know is being transported on the red blood cell. Yeah. It helps to regulate temperature. You may have noticed if you're outside running around that you start to get sweaty. That helps cool you off. But also you may notice that you get pink. Your cheeks get pink. And that is because the red blood cells are rushing to the surface of your skin to also cool off. Okay, so they help to regulate our body temperature. Blood helps to fight disease. We have warfare with our army of white blood cells. So how does the red blood cell act? Like a bus traveling through our body? That's a good description right there. It drops off oxygen and picks up CO2, right? And why is there always a need for blood donors? Blood is needed for people who've lost blood due to accidents or maybe during a surgery. So donated blood can be stored for a limited amount of time, but it can be stored and used for anyone. So if I donate my blood, I may not know who's getting it, but it might be useful. So I try to donate now and then. You can ask your folks, grandparents, or whoever, if they have ever donated their blood. All right, so this is our lab, what it would have been today. We would have had our flasks with the different kinds of things here. We would have predicted an outcome for donors and receivers. Pretty cool. But when we get together next week, look at those page numbers on there. I've got them. I guess the 197, 198 is the more accurate number right there. But we would write things down, make predictions and things like that. And I will bring that so we can do that lab. Okay, and then we're done with our lecture for today. And I believe next week we will be talking about health and staying healthy. And then the week after that will be our project day. And then that last week of school, we have our day called Jeopardy Day, okay, where we test our knowledge of the whole year to see how much you remember. Okay, gang, y'all stay well out there. I'll try to get better quick, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.